and I was asked the opinion, same question, and I said I normally don't use installation as a term in my work, but I prefer the use of, I don't know if there's a verb word for it, I use installative. So it's in the process of, it's basically an object that you use within a given space to create the story of the work. So it's installative. I believe that the sensibility, the cultural sensibility of object making, and also the functional sensibility of these objects for ritual, for traditional practices, for say for agriculture, you know, it's very functional. And as I said, because it's a piano, in many ways it deconstructs the Western instrument, classical instrument from, you know, it's just, the piano was invented by an Italian inventor in the 1700s. But later, as a cultural object, it moved from Italy, went to Germany, went to France, went to the UK, and then, you know, in the 70s it was perfected in design. In the 70s it went to Japan. Japan was the biggest manufacturer, but now it's shifted to China. The mass production of instruments, of pianos now is based in China now. So in many ways it's a transcultural object that's moving about. But I no longer kind of problematize whether installation is a Western. I think the term was a modernist term from the West. They coined it. But the sensibility is actually very much part of our culture, you know. It's not much of the distinction between West or East. I think all cultures that has undergone, like, you know, even in the so-called Western countries, before industrialization, they lived through agricultural societies. And the same thing, the making of objects, it's the same, you know. Of course, the difference is when nations, again, nations are also recent 19th century inventions, I think. Before nations, there were just different borders, you know. It's always culture. I don't believe culture is fixed. I think we constantly evolve. And what is important is to have a balance. I believe in the idea of justice, equity. So this is the bigger problems. I find sometimes when we try to make the distinction between East and West can be as problematic as nationalism, because we are essentializing the culture or the culture of one over the other. I think it kind of a culture moves between the dynamics of those differences, you know, and like I use objects because I grew up in already, you know, in a family of piano makers making Western instruments, but at the same time we always mix. I mean, our local pianos were made from local timber, but of course the technology is German, and then the music that gets played on these instruments can be both Western classical music or Filipino classical music. So yeah, so it's never kind of fixed in one location. So going back to the question, I prefer the use of installative work. So you create objects to tell stories, and we can tell stories everywhere, I think. You know, this visit to KL is very kind of important for me because it's my first visit, and you know, maybe in many ways I'm interested in the historical Rizal, because Rizal was often seen in Philippine history as a Malay scholar. So before he was, you know, he was executed, he was actually doing some studies in the southern culture in Mindanao, but also looking at collections of like Islamic art in the south. So there was already that interest. I think I mentioned Blumenbach, and he was probably an influence in that kind of Malay sort of heritage and culture. Yeah. So it's retracing. So I'm here to learn. I look at art making as always a process of questioning, but also of and you learn from asking questions.